Hello and welcome to Britain's favourite Sunday sermon, this Sunday, the 8th of October. Now, breaking news from last week when I spoke about net zero. During the week, I discovered an extraordinary research paper finding has just been produced by Norway's equivalent of our own Office for National Statistics. It's called Statistics Norway, and their latest research paper on climate change, the summary conclusion is so extraordinary, but surprise, surprise, it hasn't been reported in the mainstream media. I need to read it to you word for word. The tests show that the standard climate models are rejected by time series data on global temperatures. We find that the effect of man-made CO2 emissions does not appear to be strong enough to cause systematic changes in the temperature fluctuations over the last 200 years. That is a really significant statement that completely cuts the legs off so much of the zealots, the cultists, who seem to think that the world is about to end. We're going to be talking a lot more about that in the future. But surprise, surprise, it doesn't suit the mainstream media's narrative, and therefore you probably haven't heard about it. That's why we will keep these things informed. But it's clear to me that the two main threats to our prosperity in the United Kingdom, to our way of life, and our very culture is net zero, which I've touched on and will come back to in other times, and also mass migration, which is a really, really significant factor. Now, let's be clear. I believe that smart immigration of highly skilled, highly qualified people, engineers and the like can of course be a huge positive, a great plus for our economy, for sectors of the economy, for healthcare and for society and our communities. That is a sensible way to proceed. And that of course, I think should be done on the basis of when we should match those who are leaving the country with highly skilled, highly qualified people coming into the UK. About 400,000 people leave every year, so we could welcome a similar number, highly qualified people coming into the UK, adding real value. That's great. That's what we should welcome. That is completely different to what we've now got here in the UK. We've actually got mass open borders migration, a complete betrayal of what successive Tory governments since 2010 in all their manifestos have promised us. A betrayal, of course, of the Brexit pledges to take back control of our borders. 2022, there was about 1.2 million people lawfully came to live in the United Kingdom. This year will be the same, next year will be similar. And frankly, as far as we can predict. Because both the Tories and the Labour Party seem to want mass open borders. They, of course, are in hock to big business that doesn't want to invest in training our own brilliant young people, that doesn't want to get involved in helping people back off out of work benefits and into work. No, they just want to import cheap, low-skilled immigration that will boost their profits. It may look good for them, but it's not good for our society, it's not good for our economy, and it's not good for our culture. And I'll tell you why it's not good for our economy. Because I agree with the head of the Office for Budget Responsibility that admitted a couple of months ago that actually wealth per head, because of mass immigration that we've had in the last 10 years or so, has not increased at all, which proves the very lie to everything we've been told by those in power, that immigration makes us all better off. But now we have the evidence that it doesn't. And actually, it's impacting, it's making us poorer. And that is a really significant factor. That's why I believe that we should have the only net zero I frankly want is net zero immigration, smart immigration, welcoming high skills, high talents, but we've got to look after our own people. We've got to train our own young people. We've got to motivate and make work pay so that people get out of work benefits back into work, which of course is good for your dignity, for your self-worth, and for your family. It's good for our economy. If you can work, you should work. That is absolutely clear. But mass lawful immigration is not good for our prosperity. It's not good for our way of life. Why do you think we've got pressure on housing, on rents, on GPs, on dentists, on trying to get a hospital appointment or an operation? All of these things deteriorating because the demand is increasing way more than the supply of public services. But let's move on to mass illegal migration, because this has been a significant 10 days or so. We've had the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, in Washington no less, call for amendments to the UN 51 Convention, quite rightly, because it's 70-year-old, it's like now a piece of aspect, completely out of time, something that was written in the 50s that is no longer suitable for the current day. She also called for a proper debate and for the need to be prepared to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. I think that's absolutely essential. But this week in the Tory party conference, not a word from the Home Secretary about the ECHR, not a word from the Prime Minister supporting his own Home Secretary's comments about the UN Convention or about the ECHR. He's more worried about technical fiddling around with A-levels in 10 years' time or fiddling around with some nanny state smoking ban, completely out of touch with the key things that affect ordinary families up and down this country. We have to stop this huge, as the Home Secretary herself said, hurricane of migration that is coming into Europe, and much of it wants to head to the United Kingdom. There's only one way to do that. You have to show real courage, real leadership. You have to stop the boats. And we know how you stop the boats because Australia successfully did it 10 years ago. You pick up and you safely take back to France. And then you do exactly the same in the Mediterranean. That's real leadership. The Prime Minister this week has been to yet another summit. More warm words, another text signed that frankly will be meaningless, particularly when you read the small print. The Home Secretary has been abandoned this week. Interesting that her cabinet colleagues, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, couldn't be bothered to listen to her speech. No, they're at some distant fringe event on the outer outskirts of the conference. So much for support. She's just been left to swing in the wind, left out to dry. And so warm words from a Home Secretary, we've heard it all before. No action, no delivery, absolutely nothing. The Prime Minister, of course, is terrified of actually what the people really want. He rejected the idea of a referendum on net zero. Here's another thing. What about a referendum on our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights? I rather like referendums. The Swiss are very good at having referendums. If we had a referendum on net zero and the ECHR, I'm absolutely convinced that the people would say, scrap net zero and leave the ECHR. Exactly the opposite of what the politicians in Westminster think. That's why they're terrified. They're out of touch. I think they're also possibly terrified that it's quite likely that the likes of Nigel and myself might well be very involved. We might lead those referendum. We've got a pretty good track record. I think it's time that the people had a say. We need to stand up. We need to be counted. Absolutely. Let's have some referenda. Net zero, ECHR. Let's listen to the people. And with that, here endeth Britain's favourite Sunday sermon.